Welcome to The Explainer. In a courtroom, the big question isn't always why did they do it, but rather, what did they intend to do? Today, we're going to break down that crucial and often confusing difference between motive and intention.
Okay, let's just dive right in. So many of us use the words motive and intention like they're the same thing. But in the legal world, whoa. That distinction is absolutely massive and can literally be the difference between a conviction and an acquittal. So what really sets them apart?
To really get this, we're not just going to stare at some dry definitions. Now, we're going to follow a story, one that's actually based on a real case, State of MP versus Durendra Kumar. It's a fantastic way to see these legal ideas play out in the real world.
So here we have the whole tragic series of events laid out in 6 stages. You've got the landlord's action, the tenant's reaction, and at first glance it seems pretty straightforward. But here's the thing. In the eyes of the law, every single one of these steps has a very specific name and a critical legal weight.
All right, so let's put on our legal hats for a second. We're going to take this story and map the legal lingo right on top of it. Let's break down this chain of events and see exactly how the law sees each and every step.
Every story has to start somewhere, right? And in the law, the chain of a crime usually begins with what we call the cause. This is the first domino to fall, the external event that kicks everything else off.
In our story, the cause is crystal clear. It's the landlord throwing the tenant out of his home. That one action right there is the trigger for this entire tragic sequence.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. That external cause creates an internal motive. Think of motive as the emotional fuel for the fire. It's the reason someone feels compelled to act. It's the answer to that big question, why?
So after getting thrown out, that feeling of injustice boils up, and the tenant's decision to get revenge, that is the motive. It's not a concrete plan yet, but it's the powerful emotional driver behind what comes next.
But here's a super important point. Just feeling vengeful isn't a crime, right? For the law to get involved, that motive has to harden into something much more specific. It has to become the intention, or as you'll hear lawyers say, the mens rea, which literally means guilty mind. This is the moment a vague feeling turns into a concrete criminal goal.
And boom, there's the jump. The desire for revenge is the general motive, the why. But the firm decision to kill the landlord, that is a specific, actionable intention, the what. Legally, this is the exact moment the crime really begins inside the perpetrator's head.
And once that intention is locked in, everything that follows falls into these really clear legal boxes. Going out and getting the knife, that's not just shopping. In the eyes of the law, that's preparation. The actual physical attack, that's the attempt. And then, tragically, the landlord's death is the final stage, the commission of the crime.
So we have 6 stages: cause, motive, intention, preparation, attempt, and commission. But here's the million-dollar question for any prosecutor. Which of these do you absolutely positively have to prove in court to get a conviction?
Well, it turns out the law is super specific about this. Of all the steps we've talked about, not every single one is considered an essential ingredient in the legal recipe for a crime.
In fact, there are only 4. The entire legal framework for proving that a crime took place rests on just these 4 key elements.
And there they are: intention, preparation, attempt, and commission. Now, take a good look at what's missing. The cause, the thing that started it all, and the motive, that emotional why. They're not actually on the list of things you need to prove.
This really puts it all in perspective. Motive is the backstory. It answers, why did he do it? But intention is the plot itself. It answers, what was his direct goal? The law cares way more about the intention because it's focused on the criminal act itself, not all the messy, complicated emotions behind it. So this leads to a pretty obvious question, right? If motive isn't essential for a conviction, then why do we hear about it all the time? I mean, every crime show, every news report, they're always obsessed with finding the motive. And here's the answer. While motive isn't an essential element of the crime, the law sees it as a highly relevant fact. Think of it like this. It's not a required ingredient, but it's the special sauce that helps the judge and jury understand the whole story and makes the prosecutor's version of events believable. And what's really fascinating is how the importance of motive can completely change depending on the kind of evidence you have. If there's an eyewitness, direct proof, then the why doesn't matter as much.
But in a case built on circumstantial evidence, where you're trying to connect a bunch of dots, the motive becomes the thread that ties the entire case together. It's crucial.
And this isn't just a theory. The courts have said this directly. This ruling basically says that when a case is purely circumstantial, a missing motive is a huge red flag. It forces the court to step back and examine every single piece of evidence with a much more critical eye.
All right, let's pull all these threads together. What are the big things we should really take away from all this?
Remember this flow. It all starts with a cause, which sparks a motive. That motive then hardens into a specific criminal intention, and that intention is what ultimately leads to the commission of the crime.
And look, if you remember just one thing, make it this. As this ruling makes so clear, if the prosecution has enough solid evidence to prove you did the act, the fact that they can't prove why you did it is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Hard evidence of the crime will always beat the mystery of the motive.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We know motive isn't required to prove guilt. But when we do know the motive, what does its presence really tell us about the nature of a crime? And about that thin line between raw human emotion and the cold, hard letter of the law? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.